Starfleet is remembered as the institution that never breaks. The Federation's sword and shield, diplomatic arm and exploratory vanguard, the organization that turns first contact into alliance and war into armistice. Every major conflict in Federation history ends with Starfleet intact, borders held, principles affirmed. The official record is one of consistent survival through ingenuity, unity, and an unshakable moral framework that transforms adversaries into partners. The canon tells a different story. What appears on screen is not an institution built to endure, but a structure held together by improvisation, luck, and the recurring failure of its enemies to exploit systemic vulnerabilities at the moment of maximum leverage. Starfleet does not win because it is resilient. It survives because its opponents hesitate, fracture, or miscalculate at the precise instant that collapse becomes inevitable. The difference is not semantic. One implies institutional strength. The other reveals contingency mistaken for destiny. The mechanism is structural. Starfleet operates under a mandate that cannot be reconciled. It is required to function as both a scientific service committed to exploration and a military defense force capable of deterring or repelling existential threats. These roles demand incompatible resource allocation, training priorities, doctrinal commitments, and operational postures. The institution optimizes for neither. It splits the difference, and that split creates fault lines that run through every layer of its operation. When pressure is applied, those fault lines open. The pattern repeats across decades and quadrants. Conflicts that should result in Federation collapse instead end in negotiated ceasefires, sudden enemy withdrawals, or improbable tactical reversals that hinge on individual initiative rather than systemic capacity. The Borg should have assimilated Earth in 2367. The Dominion should have shattered the Alpha Quadrant by 2374. The Klingon Empire could have dismantled the Federation during the brief war of 2372 to 2373. In each case, survival is not the result of superior doctrine, logistics, or strategic coherence. It is the result of the enemy failing to press an advantage that was, by all tactical logic, insurmountable. This is not a story about Starfleet's strength. It is an investigation into why that strength was never sufficient, and why the institution came within inches of total dissolution more times than the historical record acknowledges. Starfleet's dual mandate is encoded in its founding charter. The organization exists to seek out new life and new civilizations, to expand the boundaries of knowledge, and to defend the territorial integrity and security of the United Federation of Planets. On paper, these missions are complementary. In practice, they are at war with each other. Exploration requires dispersed assets, extended deployment cycles, minimal armament, and a command culture that rewards curiosity, diplomatic flexibility, and scientific achievement. Defense requires concentrated firepower, rapid response capability, standardized combat doctrine, and a command culture that rewards decisiveness, tactical aggression, and the willingness to inflict and absorb casualties. Starfleet attempts to serve both mandates with the same ships, the same personnel, and the same command structure. The Galaxy-class starship is the most visible expression of this compromise. It is a deep space explorer carrying families and children, equipped with extensive scientific laboratories and diplomatic facilities. It is also expected to serve as a frontline combatant in fleet engagements against peer adversaries. The ship's design prioritizes habitation, long-range autonomy, and sensor capability. Its weapons and defensive systems are adequate for self-defense and limited tactical engagements, but they are not optimized for sustained combat. When the Enterprise D faces a single Borg cube at Wolf 359, it is one of 40 starships lost in a matter of hours. The fleet sent to intercept the cube represents a significant portion of Starfleet's available combat strength. The loss is catastrophic, and it exposes the institutional failure to anticipate that exploration and defense cannot be accomplished with the same tool. Wolf 359 is not an outlier. It is the visible result of decisions made decades earlier. During the 2000 360 seconds, Starfleet operates approximately 12,000 vessels according to various on-screen references. The majority are science vessels, transports, and light cruisers designed for survey, cargo, and colonial support. Fewer than 15% are combat-capable capital ships. Of those, a significant fraction are older Excelsior and Ambassador-class vessels approaching the end of their operational lifespan. The Federation controls 8,000 light-years of territory and maintains borders with the Klingon Empire, Romulan Star Empire, Cardassian Union, Tholian Assembly, Breen Confederacy, and unclaimed space that includes the Borg Collective's approach vector from the Delta Quadrant. The ratio of defensive capability to territorial exposure is not sustainable. Starfleet knows this. Command does not act on it because the political structure of the Federation does not permit a permanent militarization of the fleet. The Federation Council views Starfleet as a service, not an army. This distinction shapes budget allocation, shipbuilding priorities, and personnel policy. When Admiral Nora Sati conducts her investigation aboard the Enterprise D in 2367, she describes Starfleet as the foundation of Federation security. What she does not say, but what the record demonstrates, is that the foundation is maintained by institutional inertia rather than deliberate investment. New ship classes are approved only after prolonged debate. The Defiant class, purpose-built as a Borg defense platform, is shelved after initial trials because the Federation Council deems it too militaristic. The program is revived only after the Dominion threat emerges, and even then, production numbers remain limited. Starfleet fields fewer than 50 Defiant-class vessels by the end of the Dominion War. The institutional preference is always to adapt existing platforms rather than commit to a dedicated warship design. This is not caution, it is paralysis disguised as principle. The Federation's ideological framework treats military buildup as a failure of diplomacy. The belief is that strength invites confrontation, that visible armament destabilizes the balance of power, and that the best defense is a reputation for peaceful intent backed by technological superiority. This logic holds as long as adversaries share the same risk calculus. It collapses when confronted with opponents who view diplomacy as a tactical delay and military restraint as exploitable weakness. The Dominion does not negotiate in good faith. The Borg do not recognize diplomacy as a category. The Cardassian Union views treaties as temporary arrangements subject to revision through force. Starfleet's doctrine is built for a strategic environment that no longer exists by the time the institution is required to defend it. The Borg incursion of 2366 to 2367 is the clearest test of Starfleet's combat readiness. A single cube enters Federation space. Starfleet scrambles a fleet of 40 ships, drawing vessels from across multiple sectors and leaving critical areas underdefended. The engagement at Wolf 359 lasts less than an hour. 39 ships are destroyed. 11,000 personnel are killed. The cube proceeds to Earth without significant damage. It is stopped not by Starfleet's tactical response, but by the crew of a single starship exploiting a vulnerability in the Borg's command structure. The Enterprise D's intervention is effective, but it is not replicable. The tactic relies on direct access to the Borg Collective's control hierarchy through a captured drone, a resource that will not be available in subsequent encounters. Starfleet does not win the Battle of Wolf 359. It survives the encounter because the Borg fail to adapt quickly enough to prevent a desperate gamble from succeeding. The institutional response to Wolf 359 is delayed, fragmented, and insufficient. The Defiant program is revived but not prioritized. The fleet is not expanded to match the scale of the threat. Training protocols are updated, but the officer corps remains dominated by personnel whose primary experience is in exploration and diplomacy, not combat command. When a second Borg cube approaches Earth in 2373, Starfleet fields a larger fleet, but the engagement follows the same pattern. Ships are destroyed in rapid succession, The cube is stopped only when the Enterprise E pursues it through a temporal anomaly into the past and prevents its alternate plan to assimilate Earth during first contact. Again, survival hinges on individual initiative and circumstances that cannot be engineered. The question is not why Starfleet struggles against the Borg. The question is why the institution does not fundamentally restructure after the first encounter exposes its inability to mount an effective defense. The answer is that restructuring would require the Federation to abandon the fiction that Starfleet is primarily an exploratory service. It would require acknowledging that the fleet's real function is deterrence, and that deterrence requires visible, concentrated, and continuously updated military capability. The Federation Council cannot make this acknowledgement without undermining the ideological foundation of the Federation itself. The result is a policy of incremental adjustment that never addresses the structural problem. The Dominion War forces a reckoning that the Borg incursions do not. The conflict begins in 2373 and escalates rapidly. Within months, the Dominion secures a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant through an alliance with the Cardassian Union. Starfleet faces an adversary with numerical superiority, industrial capacity, and a willingness to sustain casualties that the Federation cannot match. By mid-2374, Starfleet is losing. The Federation's borders contract, core systems are threatened. Casualty rates among frontline crews exceed 50% in some engagements. The fleet is forced to adopt tactics it has never trained for, to build ships it has never prioritized, and to accept losses that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. The war exposes every weakness baked into Starfleet's dual mandate. Ships designed for exploration are pressed into combat roles and destroyed. Personnel trained in diplomacy are given tactical commands and overwhelmed. Supply lines stretched across light years collapse under sustained pressure. Starfleet's technological edge, long assumed to compensate for numerical inferiority, proves insufficient against an enemy that fields mass-produced vessels designed solely for war. The Defiant class becomes the template for Starfleet's wartime production. But the shift comes too late. The Federation does not have the industrial base to match Dominion shipyards. The fleet's expansion is constrained by resource availability, construction time, and the political reality that the Federation member worlds have no tradition of total war mobilization. The Klingon Empire and Romulan Star Empire, eventual allies, contribute their own fleets, but even combined, the Alpha Quadrant coalition operates at a persistent numerical disadvantage throughout the conflict. Starfleet's survival depends on three factors that it does not control. First, the Dominion's logistical chain is severed when the wormhole connecting the Gamma and Alpha Quadrants is mined and later sealed. This prevents reinforcements and creates a ceiling on Dominion's strength in the theater. Second, the Cardassian Union defects at the climactic moment, turning its fleet against the Dominion and fracturing the enemy's operational cohesion. Third, the Breen Confederacy, a late-war Dominion ally, deploys an energy-dampening weapon that temporarily disables Starfleet and Romulan vessels, but Klingon ships remain unaffected due to differences in power system design. This allows the coalition to maintain some offensive capability during the final push. None of these factors result from Starfleet doctrine, strategic planning, or institutional strength. All of them are contingent on circumstances outside Starfleet's ability to engineer or predict. The Dominion should have won. On screen, the Federation's survival is portrayed as the result of courage, alliance, and tactical brilliance. The structural record shows something else. The Federation survives because its enemy's leadership chooses to accept a negotiated peace rather than continue a war of attrition it could still win. The Founders are dying from a Section 31 bioweapon. Their withdrawal is not a military defeat, it is a biological and political calculation. Starfleet does not prevail through superior combat capability. It endures long enough for the enemy to have a reason to stop. This is the pattern. Starfleet does not lose because its opponents collapse first. The Klingon Federation War of 2000, 372 to 2000, 373 follows the same structure. The conflict begins when the Klingon Empire, convinced that the Cardassian government has been infiltrated by the Dominion, invades Cardassian space and withdraws from the Khitomer Accords. Starfleet intervenes to protect Cardassian refugees and enforce Federation neutrality. The Klingons interpret this as an act of war. Hostilities escalate rapidly. Klingon forces raid Federation outposts, engage Starfleet patrols, and launch strikes against strategic targets. Starfleet is forced to divert resources from other theaters, redeploy ships from exploratory missions, and fortify core systems. The fleet is not prepared for a two-front conflict. The Klingons are. The war is brief, but the damage is significant. Starfleet loses ships, territory, and credibility. The conflict ends not because Starfleet repels the Klingon offensive, but because the Dominion threat becomes undeniable and Chancellor Gowron agrees to a ceasefire. The Klingons do not withdraw because they are defeated. They withdraw because the strategic calculus changes. Starfleet is spared a protracted conflict with a peer adversary only because that adversary chooses to redirect its attention elsewhere. The record is consistent. When Starfleet faces an existential threat, it does not overcome that threat through institutional resilience. It survives because the adversary's attention shifts, internal cohesion fractures, or a critical vulnerability is exploited by individual actors operating outside established doctrine. The institution is not built to win wars. It is built to delay, disrupt, and endure until the conditions for survival reassert themselves. This is not resilience. It is dependence on luck. The Enterprise D's encounter with the Romulan warbird at the neutral zone in 2364 demonstrates the tactical gap that exists even in peacetime. The warbird decloaks, demonstrates overwhelming firepower, and withdraws without explanation. Starfleet has no effective countermeasure to cloaking technology. The Federation's sensor systems cannot reliably detect cloaked vessels. The fleet's tactical doctrine assumes that engagements begin with mutual awareness and positional maneuvering. Romulan doctrine does not. The Romulans strike from concealment, destroy the target, and withdraw before reinforcements arrive. Starfleet knows this. The institution has known it since the original encounters with Romulan vessels in the 2,260 seconds. In 6 decades, no reliable counter has been fielded. The fleet remains vulnerable to an adversary that refuses to fight on Starfleet's terms. This vulnerability is not an engineering problem, it is a doctrinal failure. Starfleet treats cloaking technology as a dishonorable tactic, a violation of the spirit of open conflict. The Federation does not develop its own cloaking systems because the Treaty of Algeron explicitly prohibits it. The treaty is signed in 2311, after the Tomed Incident, a brief but destructive conflict with the Romulan Star Empire. The Federation agrees to the cloaking ban in exchange for the Romulans retreating into isolation and establishing the neutral zone as a buffer. The calculation at the time is that isolating the Romulan threat is worth sacrificing a tactical capability. The long-term consequence is that Starfleet fights every subsequent engagement with one hand tied. The treaty is not revisited even after the Romulans re-emerge as an active threat. It is not revisited after the Dominion War begins. It is not revisited after the Scimitar, a Riemann warship equipped with a near-perfect cloaking device, nearly destroys Earth in 2379. The Federation's adherence to the treaty is treated as a measure of moral integrity. The cost is paid in destroyed ships and lost personnel. Doctrine is the problem. Starfleet's command culture prioritizes principle over pragmatism, moral consistency over tactical flexibility. This is not an accident. It is the result of decades of institutional selection for officers who demonstrate diplomatic skill, scientific achievement, and commitment to Federation ideals. These qualities produce excellent explorers and mediocre combat commanders. The institution does not recognize this as a problem until it is forced to fight wars it cannot win with officers who were never trained to win them. Captain Jean-Luc Picard is the archetype. Diplomat, archaeologist, philosopher, and explorer. He commands the Federation's flagship. His record includes first contact with dozens of species, successful negotiation of treaties, and resolution of conflicts through dialogue. His combat record is less impressive. The Enterprise D is destroyed under his command during an engagement with a poorly armed Klingon bird of prey. The ship's shields are rendered ineffective because the enemy has prior knowledge of their modulation frequency. The failure is not Picard's, it is systemic. The Enterprise D is a ship designed to project presence and capability, not to survive sustained combat. Its destruction is the inevitable result of pressing an exploration platform into a combat role it was never designed to fill. Picard's successor, Captain Edward Jellicoe, offers a glimpse of what a combat-focused Starfleet might look like. Jellicoe assumes command of the Enterprise D during the Cardassian crisis in 2369. His first actions are to implement 4-shift rotations, cancel diplomatic functions, and drill the crew in combat maneuvers. The crew resists. First Officer William Riker openly challenges the new protocols. The institutional culture of the Enterprise, shaped by years under Picard's command, treats Jellicoe's approach as authoritarian and unnecessary. Jellicoe is effective. The mission succeeds. But his command style is an anomaly, not a model. Starfleet does not promote officers like Jellicoe to fleet command. It promotes officers like Picard. This is a choice. The Federation chooses to field a fleet commanded by diplomats because the alternative requires admitting that the fleet's primary function is war, not exploration. That admission would unravel the Federation's self-conception as a peaceful union of worlds dedicated to cooperation and discovery. The institution cannot make that admission without fundamentally altering its political and cultural identity, so it does not. It sends explorers into combat and calls their survival a testament to ingenuity rather than an indictment of institutional failure. The cost accumulates slowly, then all at once. The Battle of the Amarion Nebula in 2371 is a massacre. A combined Romulan-Cardassian fleet, 20 ships strong, enters the Gamma Quadrant to launch a preemptive strike against the Founder's homeworld. The fleet is annihilated. 150 Jem'Hadar attack ships, emerge from concealment, and destroy the entire force in minutes. No survivors are recovered from the Romulan contingent. The Cardassian ships are obliterated. The engagement is a demonstration of Dominion superiority and a warning to the Alpha Quadrant. Starfleet is not directly involved, but the message is unmistakable. The Dominion can muster overwhelming force, coordinate it with precision, and deploy it without warning. Starfleet's doctrine of dispersed assets and individual ship autonomy is obsolete in the face of an enemy that operates as a unified war machine. The lesson is ignored. Starfleet does not consolidate its forces. It does not adopt Dominion tactics. It does not abandon the dual mandate. Instead, it continues to deploy ships on exploratory missions, maintain diplomatic outposts, and prioritize scientific surveys even as the Dominion begins infiltrating the Alpha Quadrant. The institution behaves as though the strategic environment has not changed, as though the rules of engagement are still set by Federation preferences rather than enemy capability. This is not optimism. It is institutional paralysis. By the time the Dominion War begins, Starfleet is caught mid-transition. The fleet includes a mix of combat-focused Defiant-class ships, aging Excelsior-class cruisers, and Galaxy-class explorers pressed into frontline service. There is no unified doctrine. Tactics vary by commander. Some captains adopt aggressive postures, others default to defensive screening. The fleet's operational tempo is unsustainable. Ships are deployed for months without resupply. Crews are rotated into combat roles with minimal retraining. The casualty rate among junior officers exceeds 40% in the first year of the war. Starfleet's recruitment and training infrastructure cannot replace losses at the rate they are sustained. The institution is bleeding out. The Federation's member worlds provide personnel, but the flow is limited by the political reality that many worlds have no military tradition. Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, and Tella contribute the majority of fleet personnel. Other member worlds provide logistical support, scientific expertise, and industrial capacity, but not ground troops or ship crews. Starfleet is not a Federation-wide institution in practice. It is an organization dominated by a handful of founding worlds and supplemented by volunteers from the broader Union. This demographic imbalance creates a ceiling on the fleet's ability to expand. The Federation cannot field a larger force because it does not have the population willing to serve in one. The Dominion does not face this constraint. The Jem'Hadar are genetically engineered for combat, bred in hatcheries, and deployed in waves. They do not require training. They do not suffer morale problems. They do not question orders. The Vorta provide strategic coordination. The Founders provide overarching command. The Dominion's military structure is purpose-built for sustained high-intensity conflict. Starfleet's is not. The Alpha Quadrant coalition survives the war, but the victory is Pyrrhic. Starfleet loses thousands of ships and tens of thousands of personnel. The Federation's economy is strained to the breaking point. Core worlds bear the burden of reconstruction. The Cardassian Union is devastated, its population reduced by catastrophic orbital bombardment during the final days of the war. The Romulan Star Empire withdraws into renewed isolation. The Klingon Empire, though victorious, suffers losses that destabilize its internal politics. The Quadrant is left weaker, more fragmented, and more vulnerable to the next existential threat. And the next threat is already visible. The Borg remain active. Species 8472 exists beyond the boundaries of known space. The Dominion is contained, not destroyed. Its forces in the Gamma Quadrant remain intact. The wormhole is no longer mined. The conditions that allowed the Federation to survive the war are temporary. The structural weaknesses that nearly led to its collapse are permanent. Starfleet does not restructure after the war. The fleet is rebuilt, but the design philosophy remains unchanged. The dual mandate is reaffirmed. Exploration missions resume. Diplomatic initiatives are prioritized. The institution returns to the posture that left it vulnerable in the first place. The only difference is that the fleet is smaller, the officer corps is less experienced, and the Federation's strategic reserves are depleted. This is not recovery. It is a slow drift toward the next crisis. The pattern holds across every major conflict in Federation history. The Earth-Romulan War, in the 2150 seconds, ends not with a decisive Starfleet victory, but with mutual exhaustion and the Romulans' withdrawal into isolation. The Federation-Klingon Cold War of the 23rd century stabilizes not because Starfleet deters Klingon aggression, but because the Organian Peace Treaty imposes a ceasefire enforced by vastly superior extra-dimensional entities. The Kitoma Conference in 2293 results in peace with the Klingon Empire, not because Starfleet defeats them, but because the Klingons' primary energy facility is destroyed and their economy collapses. Every major turning point in Federation security depends on forces outside Starfleet's control. The institution is not the guarantor of Federation survival. It is the beneficiary of favorable circumstances. The deeper mechanism is visible in the fleet's response to technological threats. Starfleet's doctrine assumes that technological superiority compensates for numerical inferiority. This assumption is valid only as long as the Federation maintains a significant qualitative edge. That edge is eroding. The Borg adapt to Federation weapons and defenses within hours of first exposure. The Dominion reverse engineers Starfleet technology from captured vessels. The Breen energy-dampening weapon renders entire classes of Federation ships inoperable. The Sonna, a minor power, develops subspace weapons capable of destabilizing stars. The technological advantage that Starfleet relies on is not a permanent feature of the strategic landscape. It is a temporary condition that requires continuous investment, innovation, and secrecy. Starfleet fails at all three. Federation research is decentralized, conducted across dozens of facilities with minimal coordination. The Daystrom Institute, Memory Alpha, the Starfleet Corps of Engineers, and various university research programs all operate independently. Breakthroughs are shared through the Federation's open scientific network, which means they are also accessible to adversaries with sufficient intelligence capability. The Federation does not classify most technological developments because secrecy is viewed as antithetical to scientific progress. The result is that Federation innovation is rapidly disseminated and then neutralized. The technological edge is temporary because the Federation treats it as a public good rather than a strategic asset. Section 31 operates outside this framework, developing weapons and tactics in secret. The bioweapon deployed against the Founders is the most visible example. It is effective, but it is also morally indefensible and politically corrosive. When the bioweapon's existence is revealed, it undermines the Federation's moral authority and strains the alliance with the Klingons and Romulans. The cure is provided only after intense pressure from Starfleet officers operating against Section 31's directives. The incident demonstrates that while Section 31 can produce results that Starfleet cannot, those results come with costs that the Federation cannot afford. The institution's reliance on a covert organization to secure outcomes it cannot achieve through legitimate means is a structural admission of failure. The mechanism is complete. Starfleet is an institution designed to explore, forced to defend, and incapable of reconciling the two. Its survival depends on adversaries failing to exploit its weaknesses at the moment those weaknesses become fatal. Its victories are contingent on circumstances it does not control. Its doctrine is incompatible with the strategic environment it must operate in, and the political structure that governs it prevents the reforms necessary to address these problems. The question is not whether Starfleet should have lost. The question is why it has not yet, and how much longer the pattern can hold. The Enterprise's encounter with the Scimitar in 2379 offers a glimpse of the future. The Scimitar is a Riemann warship equipped with a Thalaron radiation weapon capable of sterilizing entire planets. It is shielded by a perfect cloaking device. It is faster and more heavily armed than any vessel in the Starfleet inventory. It is commanded by Shinzon, a clone of Jean-Luc Picard, who understands Starfleet tactics intimately. The Scimitar ambushed the Enterprise and 2 Romulan warbirds. The engagement is a slaughter. One warbird is destroyed immediately. The second is crippled. The Enterprise is systematically torn apart. The ship's shields fail. Its weapons are depleted. Its hull is breached in multiple sections. The crew fights not to win, but to delay the Scimitar long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Reinforcements do not arrive. The Enterprise survives because Shinzon delays activating the Thalaron weapon to monologue, because Commander Data sacrifices himself to destroy the weapon from inside the Scimitar, and because the prototype emergency holographic system provides a momentary distraction. The survival of Earth depends on a villain's arrogance, a crew member's self-sacrifice, and a newly installed piece of technology that was never intended for combat use. It does not depend on Starfleet's ability to counter the threat. The Scimitar is not an anomaly. It is a proof of concept. Any adversary with sufficient resources and strategic focus can build a vessel that Starfleet cannot defeat. The Federation's security depends entirely on its enemies choosing not to invest in such a vessel or failing to deploy it effectively. This is not deterrence, it is vulnerability disguised as stability. The Dominion War demonstrates the same principle on a strategic scale. The Federation does not defeat the Dominion. It survives long enough for the Dominion's leadership to accept peace terms. The Founders are dying. The female changeling, the Dominion's operational commander in the Alpha Quadrant, agrees to a ceasefire only after Odo, a changeling loyal to the Federation, promises to return to the Great Link and share the cure for the disease killing them. The war ends because the enemy's leadership values survival over victory, not because Starfleet forces a military conclusion. This is the defining characteristic of Starfleet's strategic position. The institution does not win wars, it endures them until the conditions for peace reassert themselves. The difference is fundamental. An institution that wins wars can set terms. An institution that endures them can only accept the terms the enemy is willing to offer. Starfleet has been accepting terms for a century. The Borg represent the ultimate test of this model. The Borg do not negotiate. They do not value survival in the way organic species do. They are not deterred by casualties. They adapt to every countermeasure. They are not constrained by logistics, politics, or morale. They are the perfect enemy for Starfleet's doctrine because they expose every assumption embedded in that doctrine as false. The Federation survives the first Borg incursion through desperation. It survives the second through time travel. Neither survival depends on Starfleet's ability to mount an effective defense. The third Borg incursion, depicted in the alternate future timeline shown in the All Good Things finale, ends with the total assimilation of the Federation. That future is averted, but the aversion is not the result of Starfleet preparing better defenses. It is the result of Q providing Captain Picard with the ability to manipulate space-time and prevent the timeline from occurring. The Federation's long-term survival against the Borg depends on external intervention, not institutional capability. The record is unambiguous. Starfleet operates on borrowed time. The institution's response to repeated near defeats is to reaffirm the principles that made those defeats possible. After the Dominion War, Starfleet resumes exploration. After the Borg incursions, Starfleet continues to field multi-role vessels instead of dedicated warships. After every crisis, the institution returns to the doctrine that left it vulnerable in the first place. This is not stubbornness, it is structural. The Federation cannot maintain a permanent war footing without abandoning the ideals that justify its existence. It cannot prioritize military readiness without undermining the political consensus that holds its member worlds together. It cannot become what it needs to be to survive without ceasing to be the Federation. This is the trap. Starfleet is built to explore a galaxy at peace. It is forced to defend a galaxy at war. The institution cannot adapt without destroying itself. It cannot remain unchanged without being destroyed by its enemies. The only path forward is to continue as it has, surviving each crisis through improvisation, luck, and the recurring failure of its adversaries to press their advantages when those advantages are overwhelming. The Dominion could have won by maintaining pressure. The Borg could have won by deploying a second cube immediately after the first. The Klingons could have won by refusing the ceasefire. The Romulans could have won by exploiting cloaking superiority consistently. None of these adversaries followed through. None of them committed to total victory when total victory was achievable. Starfleet survives because its enemies hesitate, miscalculate, or prioritize other goals at the critical moment. This is not strategy. It is statistical inevitability masquerading as resilience. The Federation's survival to this point does not prove that Starfleet is strong. It proves that the institution has not yet faced an enemy willing to commit to its destruction without reservation or distraction. The Borg are distracted by assimilation targets across the galaxy. The Dominion is constrained by the wormhole and eventually by disease. The Klingons are constrained by honor, culture, and shifting political priorities. The Romulans are constrained by isolationism and internal intrigue. Every adversary has failed to sustain focus long enough to finish what they started. The moment an adversary removes those constraints, Starfleet collapses. The clincher is visible in Starfleet's long-term trajectory. The institution is not rebuilding strength, it is managing decline. The fleet's average age is increasing. The proportion of combat-capable vessels is decreasing. The officer corps is stretched across too many roles with insufficient training for any of them. The Federation's member worlds are war-weary and resistant to further militarization. The political will to expand the fleet does not exist. The economic capacity to sustain a larger force is eroding. The technological edge is narrowing. The strategic reserves are depleted. Every metric that defines institutional readiness is trending in the wrong direction. Starfleet is weaker now than it was before the Dominion War. It is less prepared for the next existential threat, and the next threat is not a question of if, but when. The Borg remain active in the Delta Quadrant. The Dominion remains intact in the Gamma Quadrant. Species 8472 demonstrated the ability to destroy Borg cubes effortlessly and may enter the Alpha Quadrant at any time. The Romulan Star Empire is destabilized by internal conflict and may collapse into civil war or external aggression. The Klingon Empire faces succession crises that could fracture the alliance. New powers are emerging at the periphery. The strategic environment is more volatile, not less, and Starfleet is less equipped to navigate it. The institution's survival record is not a testament to its strength, it is a countdown. Every near defeat defers the final one. Every crisis survived reduces the capacity to survive the next. The pattern cannot hold indefinitely. At some point, an adversary will exploit the structural weaknesses that Starfleet cannot repair, will press the advantage that Starfleet cannot counter, and will sustain the offensive that Starfleet cannot repel. When that moment comes, the institution will collapse not because it made a tactical error, but because it was designed to fail. The Federation built Starfleet to explore, then asked it to defend, and never reconciled the contradiction. The institution's survival depends on adversaries failing at the moment of maximum leverage. That dependence is not strategy, it is hope, and hope is not a plan. The true measure of Starfleet's position is not found in its victories, but in the margins by which it avoids defeat. Those margins are thin, they are narrowing, and they are not renewable. The institution survives because it has not yet been tested by an enemy that refuses to stop. The record demonstrates that when such an enemy emerges, Starfleet will not adapt, will not restructure, and will not abandon the dual mandate that ensures its vulnerability. It will fight, as it always has, with improvisation and desperation, and it will survive only if the enemy repeats the mistakes of every adversary that came before. The odds of that repetition decrease with every conflict. The structural flaws remain, the doctrine remains, the dual mandate remains, and the next existential threat is already in motion, unseen, unanticipated, and incompatible with the institution built to face it. Starfleet should have lost. It has come within moments of losing more times than the historical record acknowledges. It survives not because it is strong, but because its enemies have been weaker, distracted, or unlucky at the precise instant that strength, focus, and luck were required to finish the fight. That pattern is not indefinite. It is a countdown, and the institution built to defend the Federation is counting down to a defeat it cannot prevent, will not see coming, and cannot survive.